Hello, everyone. Nice to see so many faces. So yes, when we're discussing the kind of sessions we could have for the online the coffee mornings, we were wondering, okay, what are the areas that are really relevant, but people are probably shying away from or trying not to think about too much, but they should really. And I think insurance came quite high, along with budgets and things, other delicacies. And that's why we decided to have a bit of an informal session to discuss in an open and free space, to discuss some insurance questions, especially in the current situation with the pandemic, but also with Brexit looming. And we thought we would invite David Johnstone, who is on my right. Hello, David. So David is an associate partner at WK Film Insurance, and he's based in Scotland. And David has got a lot of experience working on film sets, well, working with film production companies and insuring films from fiction to TV to documentary. So he's got a very broad experience. And we had a chat, and we thought that the best format for today would probably be to we have a few talking points, but we would like to encourage you to interrupt or ask any question at any point, but because that's how the conversation will keep going. And David has got a lot of examples and a lot of stories to share as well, which will be useful to everyone. So yeah, don't hesitate. If there is anything you want to ask, or if you want to add something to what we're discussing, just raise your hand or use the little wave button, and we'll put you we'll ask you to repeat what you're saying. Sorry, I've got a few more people coming. So yes, I think we're going to start, David, with the unavoidable C word, so COVID-19. And yeah, if you could tell us a bit more about yourself, because I'm sure I did a pretty bad job introducing you, but then also mention a little bit how the situation has changed for you in the past 8 months.
Sure. Pleasure to join you all this morning for the Coffee Morning Talk. I've worked in film and television insurance for 16 years, for a period of 7 years with quite a large national broker. I used to handle the Channel 4 scheme and all that involved, and then my own company for the remaining time. And my day-to-day work, I work at the meeting point between the creative and the financial. So in a way, I'm a translator in a certain sense, where I'm taking the creative ideas and giving that information to insurers so that they can offer the protection for our clients, and also the comfort for the financiers that are funding your projects as well. Quite often there's two sides, where you're protecting the project, but also making sure that everyone's comfortable with what's happening, and the finance is free to flow and for you to get on with your productions. So yeah, this year, in terms of insurance, it's a lot's been going on, as there is in the world. I think we've seen more changes this year than we have in the last 10-15 years from the insurance side of things. Insurers now exclude COVID-19 as standard from their policies. As a pandemic, it's classed as it's not an insurable risk because it's a known hazard. Insurance is there to cover the unexpected, if you like. But the first, when the pandemic first affected us, though, back in February, March, insurers between them estimate the losses at about £8 billion, which is quite an eye-watering figure. And that amount of losses, has had quite a big effect on the not just the policies that we can offer now that the exclusion's in place, but also the insurer's outlook on. They look at film and TV in a slightly different way now. You can imagine a boardroom, it's never been something that they've fully understood. All they've understood is that they can make money from it. Not every year, but it balances up and it works. The losses of this nature this year has kind of changed everything. So we've seen insurers that have been established in the UK for decades. Some of them paused for a little while just to take stock of the situation, try and understand what was happening and their potential losses. As a result, some have changed the way they operate, and they're perhaps looking just at the smaller projects. They have a cap on the amount of risk that they want to take on. Other insurers have taken quite a severe turn and said, look, this isn't for us. We're going to come out of the market. So yeah, keeping on top of everything that's been happening, it's been a lot of work. And the main consideration that I have when I'm placing a risk is to make sure that the insurers are as good as their word, because that's all insurance says. It's a promise based on the policy wording. But if something goes wrong, they're there for you to put it right again. So it's a legal contract that's drawn up. You've got the policy schedule, which offers the specific covers that you have tailor-made to the needs of your production, and then the policy wording, which is the final part of that contract. So yeah, that's the year that it's been. The government scheme, the Restart scheme, has had a big effect on the business that we do. I mean, everything stopped as it did with the whole country for a good 4 or 5 months. The government Restart scheme that's came in and gave I think the main job it's done is given the confidence that there is a kind of safety net there to support productions if they go ahead and find out they have big losses to do with COVID-19. That scheme I see as being more useful for the kind of high-end film and TV sector rather than documentary as such, mainly because I think part of the requirements of the scheme is that the production delivers within a short period. I think it's between 6 and 9 months. And documentary, as we all know, quite often is a much longer story than that. So that kind of rules out documentary unless it's something that's a quick turnaround project. I mean, that said, it's documentary, I would say, is the one type of business that has managed to keep going easier than others, mainly because the amount of people that are involved in production. If you have a cast and crew of 150, 200 people, the procedures now to make sure you can work safely are obviously a lot more demanding than having just a handful of key people. So in that respect, documentary hopefully hasn't been as badly affected as other businesses or other types of film and TV. But that said, the whole country is obviously feeling the economic effects. Yeah, so that's the year so far.
Thanks, David. I really like what you said about translating in a creative way. I think it's something we don't often see that way when it comes to finances or insurance. We don't see the creative side of it, but I think when it comes to documentary, you have to be quite creative, and it's great to know that you're the translator. I was wondering, maybe you could walk us. Let's imagine small size production company wanting to start the production of a feature documentary, let's say now. So they would approach you, and what would be the next step for them, knowing that they're probably going to be filming for on and off for 2 years, so beyond the pandemic, and that they don't necessarily have a huge budget. Let's say they're filming a bit in Scotland and a bit abroad, but at a later stage when they can. So what would you advise them, and how would you deal with them?
So the first thing we'd do is basically a fact find for me to be able to offer the correct advice and to arrange the correct cover. I need to know the project as well as you do. So to do that, we're looking for a kind of brief synopsis, the subject matter, the key people that would be involved. And again, from an underwriting point of view, what we're looking towards there for insurers is their ages, because that has an effect on to be able to complete, etc. We're also looking towards, if there's anybody that's a key component to the documentary. I mean, if your documentary is about the life of someone and they're an at-risk person, then that's obviously a consideration that we have to be aware of, so you're covered properly, and so insurers are aware. With insurance, you're only covered for anything that we tell insurers about. So if something's a material fact as it's called, and that's something that would influence a prudent underwriter to accept the risk, then that's something we need to declare. So it's always very much a conversation, and an ongoing conversation as well. Your plans at the beginning of 2 years, pretty much unlikely to be the same plans in 2 years' time. And that's the case with any film or TV production. But perhaps more so with documentary, as the story changes and grows, and you find out the specifics of that can change over the course of time. So yeah, it's an ongoing conversation, and I would say, in my experience, the producers and line producers that speak to me the most often are the ones that have the less claims. And it's not because I'm avoiding the claims at all, but I think it's because they have that kind of thought about what they're doing, and they're aware of the risks, and they're thinking about it. I think that's more the reason for it. So the diligent producers that are always discussing the plans and the changes and how that can affect things, I guess they're more aware of what could happen. And yeah, we're just making sure that safety net's there with insurers. So yeah, the fact find is the main thing. If you're looking at filming overseas, one of the big changes that, aside from COVID, that's on the horizon, unfortunately, is the changes with Brexit. Now, as part of that, at the moment, there's a European health card that offers reciprocal health agreements with different countries in Europe. So after the end of the year, that will be no longer in place. And for me, that policy, the business travel insurance, is the most important policy that you can have, because we're not talking about the financier's money here. What we're talking about is a benefit to you and your team. The people that are abroad, that's the policy that's going to make sure you get treated in the hospital when you're away, repatriate you back to the UK again, dead or alive, and the costs, if someone dies abroad, are more than you would expect. It can be up to £75,000. Now, this is a policy that costs, it can be as low as £25 per person, and that's it's such an important safety net to have. The other side of it as well, it includes personal accident cover. So we had a claim example where someone was filming, I think it was South Africa, and in their own time, they were there for months, two and a half months, and in their own time, they'd arranged a trip horse riding, and it was someone that was an experienced rider, and they unfortunately fell off the horse and damaged their back. Now, aside from the cost to production, whereby they had to get another person to come in and fill that role, but that person had to be treated in hospital, and yeah, the hospital costs had to be covered. When they were repatriated back to the UK again, rather than flying standard class, they were upgraded to business class, so they had more legroom, so they could, for health reasons, so they could stretch out. But the recovery was quite a long time back in the UK. It was a good 7 or 8 months with that person, I believe was a camera operator. They couldn't work. I mean, their job's a physical job, so they were unable to earn a wage. And the business travel policy during that period offered cover, I think it was up to a maximum of £500 a week. And it really hit home when I spoke to that person, and they said, look, I don't know what I would have done here. I would have lost my house. I don't know I'm in a bad way mentally because I'm stuck inside and I can't work, but I don't know what would have happened at Christmas. And it really hit home the human cost of that small policy that we arranged. And what I would say as well is the cover that we arrange is business travel cover. The travel insurance that comes free with your bank account, that's not covering you. Free with a credit card, that's not the one. And you may think, oh, it's fine, I'll just say, you know, it was a personal trip. But what insurers do as part of their process when they're checking the claim over is they'll ask for a copy of the flights. So if you say you're on a leisure trip and the Scottish Documentary Institute has bought your plane tickets, that claim's going to be kicked out. And the first time you'll be aware of that is when you're in a hospital and not able to do anything about it. It's not a position I ever want to be talking to somebody about. So yeah, it's not the most expensive policy, but in terms of human benefits to you and your team, it's probably the most important. But yeah, that's a change that's occurring after Brexit happens. So yeah, don't forget travel insurance.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us have got, on a personal level, have got this experience with insurance, whether it's home insurance or the famous car insurance, when you're renting a car and you feel like you're paying 3 times the price of the rental just to cover everything. And I suppose that gives you, that traumatizes you for, and then when you're thinking about film insurance, that's when you're like, oh, do I really need this kind of travel insurance? But it's good to hear you say that actually with a proper discussion, the prices can be very affordable, and it's not what you would expect. So it's good to encourage people to talk to not insurers directly, but brokers, and to see what is needed and how much it's going to be for them. But yeah, it's interesting to hear for a small amount everything that can be covered with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small amount per person. I mean, it can add up.
Yeah, of course.
10, 12 people traveling, but it's so essential. It's not something to be scrimped on.
Do we have any question at this stage? And there is no stupid question at all when it comes to insurance, so don't hesitate. Anyone? Oh, yes, Adam.
Yes, David, I'd be interested to know what you can tell us about prices at the moment. I've just had to take out insurance. I sort of paid an awful lot for it, and it literally went up 33% in 2 days between me giving an initial quote and actually saying yes, I'll go ahead with it. That was, and I'm told this is just because a lot of insurers have lost a lot of money and are looking to get it back. So I'm curious to know what patterns you've seen, and are there, you know, some insurers who haven't lost a lot of money and aren't hiking their rates, or is it across the board?
Thanks, Adam. That's a good question. Generally speaking, the market has hardened, as they call it, and that's, you know, as I say, as a result of the losses. The overall insurers is quite eye-watering, about £8 billion. And the way that insurance works, part of one of the principles is that the contributions of many pay for the losses of the few. So that's quite a nice philosophical idea, that, you know, everyone's in it together as an industry. When they're struggling, everyone pitches in to help. But unfortunately, what you're witnessing is the other side of that, which is where there are losses for many, and everyone's been asked to make the books balance effectively. Generally speaking, what we've seen is that rates have gone up around about 20%. But that could be different depending on the specifics of what you're looking to do and how hazardous it is. And I guess it could also depend on how good the original deal was. If that was exceptional and undervalued by 13%, that would perhaps account for that difference, the 33% increase. It's a lot of money.
Well, it was from what I was told was the bare minimum deal, 750 to 1,000, literally overnight.
Yeah, so I think what you've witnessed there is insurers increasing their minimum premium. So rather than being a price increase as such, what that insurer, the way that they've been able to keep going, is they've said, like, you know, let's look at the figures here. How many camera claims do we get with someone that pays minimum premium? Average camera claim is, say, 30,000. We need to look at, you know, a lot, how many policies going ahead without any problems to make that balance. And perhaps they've looked at that and said, well, you know what, that's not quite balancing up. We can continue with what we're doing, the business can carry on, but what we're going to do is just increase that minimum to help the books balance. Every insurer's looked at this in different ways. And as I say, some really established big players have stopped entirely. I mean, there's so many changes in the last year. It's, I think everyone's trying to understand the position we're in. And that's very difficult to do because even the health experts don't fully understand what's happening with this new disease.
Yeah.
So
I think what's sort of galling, what I find difficult, I have to say, and in the future I'll come to you, David, we'll have a conversation next time, is I never really understand what I'm buying. And in this particular case, we needed insurance purely for the financier. It's a contractual requirement. We really didn't need insurance that with that the production was in and the things we're doing. But it's just a financial requirement. It was, this is Doc Society, BFI in this particular case, but it would be true of Scotland or whoever else. And it wasn't very much money we were getting for the financier, but it was like, okay, well, we just have to get the insurance and this is what the minimum costs. But to be paying £1,000 for that was painful, I have to say.
Yeah.
And when, as I say, it always feels to me there must be a better way. There must be something more bespoke that we can do. But with documentary, particularly, Scott, the kind of films we make, and a lot of us make up here, you're talking about very small amounts of money that you're in, relatively, you're insuring. I mean, £50,000, £100,000, sort of policies. So, and it feels like a lot of the kind of templates for insurance don't exactly really match, the way we make films, which is very much self-shooting, solo, often somebody doing something in their own flat, just with archive and online, but you still have to have that sort of basic insurance policy to satisfy the requirements of the funders. Yeah,
I think that's very true. I think a lot of it comes from perhaps lack of fully understanding from the financiers. They're just asking for the set of things. And they've perhaps got a tick box of things that have to be done. They're not really looking at it further as to what the actual risks are. And that's a challenge for everybody. What I would say is when choosing a broker, and there's a number of specialists, the real thing you should look out for is the amount of time that they can spend with you. Because it's very easy to take that quick attitude, right, minimum premium, there we go, out the door, and under the bigger thing. It's that's the real value, is spending time with the broker and getting their opinion and making sure they understand everything fully. That's the only way you can get the correct advice.
Can I just ask one more question? I'll let other people in if they have anything to say. This price rise issue, I'm talking about production insurance, but have we seen the same thing in E&O, or is it the market in that respect?
At the moment, touch wood, the E&O markets that I use, we haven't seen that transfer through. But the telling point for that will be at the end of the year. So insurers, they have insurance from reinsurance companies. And the treaties are renegotiated at the end of every year. And it could be at that stage, there may be a price increase that comes through. But certainly at the moment, things have held on the E&O side.
I'd get my E&O in now then.
Yes.
David, could you just explain a little bit what E&O is for the other people?
So errors and omissions are shortened to E&O. As cover for the content of a production, and it's covering the legal side of things. So if your content should defame somebody and they try and take action, court action, this is a policy that will offer cover for defence costs in court and any court award if applicable. And in practice, generally speaking, it rarely goes as far as court. Because insurers realise that paying for the lawyer costs more than perhaps trying to settle out of court. And in a way, this is perhaps one of the reasons that copyright laws don't change very often, because no new legal precedents are set. errors and omissions. You know, we were speaking earlier, or I was speaking earlier, about the nice nature of insurance and the idea that the contributions of many pay for the losses of the few, and you know, there's that nice kind of idea behind it. E&O is not so much that. E&O's is about lawyers and people trying to make money. It's not the nicest side of insurance. The errors and omissions, the kind of risk profile, if you like, is low frequency, high severity. So claims don't happen very often, but if they do, the legal cost to defend that can be exceptionally high. And if something does go as far as court, you know, generally speaking, you're looking at about £1 million claim. So as a result, you know, that £1 million trying to split out the premium between all the different policies, the premium is quite high. And again, quite often there's minimum premiums. And that's because it's down to the content of a production. That doesn't really relate to the budget. You know, you could have a self-funded production with no budget, but you could say some terrible things that can't be substantiated. You know, that's extremely high risk without the budget to support the risk, if you like, for insurers.
And one thing about E&O is it's a requirement when you're working with broadcasters in the UK and abroad. So if you're thinking of distributing your film to film festivals, mostly, no one will ask you for an E&O. But if you're thinking that there might be some TV sales down the line, then you have to have an E&O. A lot of funders and broadcasters in America won't even touch the projects if you don't have the cover in place. And I know that BBC and Channel 4 are now asking for E&O in place, which I was quite surprised about.
I mean, it's a contractual requirement for Screen Scotland, so you know, you can't get around that. I mean, there is a view that says you only really need E&O if you're going to get distributed in America, because that's where people sue and that's where the costs get very high. I've certainly heard that from European co-producers that I've worked with, who are a bit baffled by our insistence on E&O, or Screen Scotland's insistence on E&O in this particular case, because they're so, you know, in Europe, I don't know, David, if you have much experience with this, but they don't tend to take it out if their you know, shows aren't going to get distributed into English language territories. But we live in an English language world, and we're faced with those costs. It always does feel like a bit of a racket, as you're suggesting, David, but I'm sure it's a racket that you're very grateful to be part of if you get sued.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a racket as such. I mean, I see claims and large claims and claims that are completely unexpected. I'll give an example. There was a case fairly recently, I think it was a feature film, whereby they'd commissioned a composer to create an original piece of music. So, you know, it's a nice clear chain of copyright there. You know, here's an original piece, we'll sign off on it. Yep, it's mine. Here's the money for it. Nice and simple. What could go wrong? But unbeknown to the producer, the composer, their partner was quite a famous musician, and just before the film was about to be released, just as advertising was ramping up, she put in a legal claim saying, hold on a minute, this is using music that I've had a hand in. I was asked my opinion about a certain part of this, and as a result of that, the score changed. Now, the producer at the other side of this, they have no idea. You know, they've signed off this original piece, they've paid the money, they're not expecting anything. But yeah, there you go. They've now got to defend themselves in court from someone that's motivated to you know, go as far as it can go.
In that case, it's not. I mean, the composer signed a contract warranting the original content. So is it not the composer who's in the line of fire there, rather than the producers?
Well, as part of their deal, the agent agreed that the composer included in the errors and omissions cover. So they're included as an additional insured, and that means an additional insured has the same cover benefits as the producer.
Right.
That was part of his deal when he signed up to do the work. So yes, the composer perhaps is at fault in this, example, but it's still landed on the producer's door. The other side of that as well, when you get a legal letter, who are you going to say that to? You've got to defend yourself in court. You need legal defense to do that. You can't write back and say, "Oh, excuse me, can we sue someone else instead, please?" That's not going to fly. So yeah, that's an example where out of the blue and unexpected, someone's landed with exceptional costs that would have prevented the film from being released. There's various other examples of similar things. And it's funny you mentioned about Europe as well. In France, one of the biggest claims that I've seen recently, in France they have different laws to do with the right to privacy. And there was I think it was an advert that went out that included a clip of someone that had sadly died without any permission from the estate or from the family. And they I think they successfully sued for millions. So yeah, it doesn't happen often, but when it happens big. And as a result of that, that's why the broadcasters, they're risk adverse. They're not going to take that risk on. So they're asking for everybody to have that policy as part of the funding agreement.
And recently, have you seen broadcasters asking for more or different elements to be in place in addition to the E&O?
Not as such. I mean, the conversation constantly evolves. The BBC, for example, they are quite often asked to push what is available under the production cover. But I see that as what they're trying to do is for everyone's benefit, if you like. And they're trying to influence what can and can't be insured. So yeah, they can be quite strict. Again, it's that kind of tick box where they're saying, right, you must have all this or you can't go ahead. I guess a recent example of that is to do with the COVID-19 cover. Now that's, as I mentioned earlier, it's excluded under the production policy. But the section it's not excluded under is employer's liability. Now, because that's a legal requirement, that policy has to be offered there. That cover has to be offered there. So employer's liability, again, it's a liability policy, so you're looking at legal defence costs in any court award. And what the suggestion is, the same with the legal requirement in the UK. If someone's injured at work, you have a right of legal recourse against the employer. So COVID-19 was always included under that part of the policy. And recently the BBC has pushed, and what was a kind of technicality, I guess, because it was included under employer's liability, but not public liability. So that, sat slightly funny. What you're covered if you're employed by a production, but if you're a member of the public, you're not covered. So yeah, the BBC's pushed to as part of their requirements now that public liability is covered for COVID as well. For us on the receiving end of that instruction, that can be a little frustrating because perhaps you're not getting financed until your broker solves out that problem. There wasn't a solution initially when that request came out, but now there is, and not just from one insurer. There's 3 or 4 that can offer that cover now. Sometimes at an extra premium, sometimes within the standard rates. But I guess that's an example of the BBC pushing the boundaries of what is a normal insurance. They'll see it as for the good of the industry. It can be a little frustrating.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a question I wouldn't mind asking. Hey David, this is all very interesting. Obviously, if one has business insurance that obviously covers video production, at what stage does a production or what scale of production needs to have its own specific insurance?
Sure. Thanks for that question. what I would say is that there can be a few different examples of this. So, for example, there could be annual policies and a business name that cover multiple productions, and that can be, quite a good way of being more economical over the long term. Generally speaking, a larger production that has its own specific production vehicle, an SPV company, that is the kind of trigger for definitely needing its own policy. And I guess that comes from the requirement for employer's liability cover, which must be in that company name. For larger projects, as I understand it, the benefit is if things don't quite go to plan, you don't have to close down your main company. Perhaps there's special risks on this one bigger production, and you can close things off and deal with it just under that company name, rather than affecting all your business. So I guess that's legally the kind of trigger. Also, I mean, even without an SPV company, I think on a larger project, it's kind of cleaner to have it under a separate policy, because you're probably looking at larger invoices and bills, and it's good to keep all that together. So I guess that's the other benefit of doing it that way.
Perfect, thank you. That was nice and clear.
Thanks. How are we for time? Should I?
Oh, we're okay. Yeah, I was wondering if there were any other questions.
I've got a question. And my business insurance, I discovered some while ago that the underwriter had actually moved their offices to Europe. So how is that going to be affected after Brexit? Is that a big thing?
This in fact is a trend we've seen. Now most companies, rather than moving their offices to Europe, are perhaps forming a new company and a new office in Europe, so they can have a base in Europe and the UK. And I guess that's part of their Brexit transition planning, so that no matter where the client is based, they still have an avenue to arrange cover. Yeah, so if a company just has a base in Europe, I'd be quite surprised. I mean, they would be effectively, backing out of UK cover entirely. So I think that's just one thing to check there. I'd be surprised if that is their sole office now.
Yeah, they moved their head office for sure to Europe, and that was the strangest part. But it's a large insurance company, so that was a shock to me. But yeah, I was just wondering if that's going to affect rates or anything come January. So
I don't think it'll affect rates as such. I mean, the COVID losses are the concern with rates, and I think that'll filter down to all insurance classes, not just business insurance or film and TV. I think that'll be your own personal home and personal vehicle insurance as well. Just while insurers try and get back on an even track again.
Thank you.
David, I'm just going to ask a question which maybe for people here who are not part of a company. So they are filmmakers, individuals, and we all know that in documentary very often you start filming when you might not have a company, a production company in place. What can they do to make sure that they are legally covered? What kind of insurance can they take as individuals as opposed to companies? And also, if you could say a little bit about risk assessment forms and how useful a tool it is, both for filmmakers and for production companies to help navigate insurance matters.
Sure. Thanks, Flore. Yeah, so in terms of individuals, and I think every filmmaker, and perhaps more so in documentary, when does it become something that you're interested in to becoming, your business? And especially, filmmakers, very established and good filmmakers, they have a second job as well. So it's difficult to work out when that point is. So legally, the point where you should have employer's liability cover is when you have someone working with you. So the employment law in the UK says that as soon as you're telling someone what to do, that is the moment where you should have that cover in place. So you don't have to contract anyone, you don't have to pay anyone, but as soon as you've got someone assisting you, that's the moment. You know, again, that's still open to interpretation between, you know, an amateur that's, you know, making things for fun and someone whose job it is. I always think of it, definitely the point where there must be insurance in place is to do with who's funding what you're doing. You know, if you're spending your own money, it could be argued that you know, it's a pastime. If you have any kind of finance or you're trying to get finance, to me, that's the point where, you know, you're doing this for business. And that is the legal requirement, that employer's liability cover. The policies that we arrange, it can be taken out in an individual's name. You know, quite often that's where companies start before they get incorporated or have a trading as name. I think there's a benefit to doing things under a company name, just like the SPV company. You know, it's a slight degree of separation. So, you know, if things don't go as planned, you know, it's not in your own name. You don't have your own liabilities, you know, against your credit file or against your name. So I think there's a benefit in starting a company. But yeah, it can be done in an individual name to begin with. Risk assessments. So again, this is, I guess, you know, you know, what happens more when you're working professionally. And certainly there's a health and safety legal requirement if you're doing something hazardous, to have a written risk assessment in place. And, you know, it's usually there's nothing mind-blowing in there. You know, it's common sense, but what it is a written record. So if something does happen, you can say, well, look, you know, we thought about this, and that's what a risk assessment should be. It should be a consideration of the hazards, an action that reduces the risk. And yeah, a good risk assessment is looking to have thought of every eventuality, no matter how big or small it happening, and doing everything you can to control that risk, to make it manageable. So risk's a funny thing. I mean, who would be a producer without taking a risk? You know, we're in the business of taking risks. But people take risks every day. I was going to say you wouldn't go outside, but that's kind of what's happening at the moment. But yeah, normally speaking, you wouldn't go outside without taking a risk. And it's all about having a manageable risk or something you're comfortable with. So as an example, that a risk manager said in a talk previously, he said, you know, you wouldn't go up to Lewis Hamilton, you know, he's in his Formula One car, you know, tap him on the helmet and say, now, don't drive too fast, it's dangerous. You know, he's a top of his game Grand Prix driver. That's his job, going fast. And, you know, he understands the risks, he's got the experience doing it. And to date, touch wood, I've not found any risk that's been too difficult to insure, as long as it's properly thought about, and there's the correct people with the correct experience to support what the plan is, to support the work. And that can be all sorts of, you know, something on the face of it that looks to be, you know, dangerous or unmanageable. But when you break it down, you know, I've always found there's a way through.
Thank you. And risk assessment forms are really useful for producers because they can help you with your budget, thinking about adding things to your budget that you hadn't necessarily thought about, and putting things in perspective. So, so we have 15 minutes left. John, do we want to maybe stop the recording if anyone has questions they would like to ask off record? Or David, was there something else you wanted to add before we stop the recording?
I don't think there's anything specific to add, but what I would say actually, and it's just a general point, I guess, to round things off. You know, with everything happening with COVID, and you know, such a sudden shock to the system, I mean, the effects the effects are quite sudden and huge. And, you know, aside from the human cost, obviously not to underplay that, but, you know, change brings with it opportunity. And you know, I see there's been a lot of changes that have happened very quickly. And quite often it's changes that we've seen a trend of for a long time, but things have just been speeded up. And I believe the documentary, you know, in general could benefit from that. I mean, aside from the kind of smaller amount of people that are involved in filming, you know, the lack of content that broadcasters have just now, because things aren't able to go as normal. You know, we can, you know, you just have to look at the amount of repeats and that are on TV. You know, that's time that needs to be taken up somewhere. And also from the theatrical side as well. I mean, I think we've seen a trend that was happening anyway, with things moving to Netflix and other SVOD channels. I mean, to me, that's speeded things up. I mean, there'll always be a place for cinema, and you know, we've seen recently the Edinburgh Film Festival do the drive-in movies, so it's more event cinema. And then Glasgow Film Festival, I think they just launched their online offering. You know, the festival online now, a curated view at home version. So I find this side really interesting. There's all sorts of changes that are coming about quicker than they would do normally. I mean, for me, the trend towards documentary is something that's been happening over a long period. I mean, I've never been interested in remakes, prequels, sequels. You know, I have no time for that. And I think when the cinemas were stuffed full of that, that was the moment where documentary perhaps got a bit more traction, where people realized that, you know, real stories are much more interesting. And yeah, I can see what I hope to be a bright future for documentary as the world moves and changes.